The cameras were rolling. World leaders filled the gleaming Geneva studio. Spotlights bounced off polished shoes and tailored suits. In the front row sat former U.S. President Barack Obama, wearing a faint smile. He wasn't expecting fireworks. No one was. The moderator tapped the microphone. Captain Ibrahim Traoré, Burkina Faso, your thoughts on the African future? The room fell into a heavy silence, the kind that steals the air from your lungs. Traoré stepped forward slowly, without haste. Calm, dignified, clad in his olive-green uniform, he looked like a soldier, but his eyes told a different story. My name is Captain Ibrahim Traoré, he began softly, and I did not come here to shake hands. I came to speak for the dead, the broken, and the silenced. A ripple of whispers stirred the crowd. For years, he continued, we begged for partnerships, we were told to wait, but all that came were bullets, debt, and silence when we cried. Obama's smile faded. The studio lights seemed to dim. Then, with fire in his voice, Traoré said, Mr. Obama, you could have changed everything. Gasps. You could hear a pin drop. The cameras zoomed in. Obama shifted in his seat, blinking more than usual. Traoré didn't blink. His chest rose and fell in slow, steady breaths. I grew up listening to you, he said, voice unwavering. When I was 16, I memorized your speeches. You made us believe we mattered. But while you spoke of hope, villages in Burkina Faso burned, our youth starved, our gold was stolen. You knew, you saw. In the second row, a woman not African wiped a tear from her eye. Traoré reached into his pocket and pulled out a faded photograph. It showed a thin, barefoot boy, smiling with a cracked tooth. His name was Boubacar. He wanted to be a doctor. A drone strike ended that dream. He didn't even know who America was. Obama lowered his gaze. I'm not here to disrespect you, Mr. President, Traoré said, his voice finally breaking. But I need to ask, why did you turn away from us when we needed you most? Obama slowly lifted his eyes, but said nothing. The world was watching. Cameras flashed. Twitter was already ablaze. But in that studio, at that moment, there was only one thing that mattered. The locked eyes of two men. Obama's lips parted slightly. He looked at Traoré like a man staring into a mirror, a reflection he didn't want to face. The kind that burns. I was taught to believe in diplomacy, Traoré continued, softer now. But how do you negotiate with silence? With hunger? With graveyards? The moderator tried to cut in, Captain Traoré, but Obama raised his hand. Let him finish. Here's your scene, fully rewritten, keeping the raw emotion and cinematic drama while tightening the flow and enhancing the power of each moment. Traoré turned to the audience. I buried more children than soldiers last year, he said. Every time I ask for help, they say, we'll look into it, but we don't need sympathy, we need justice. He paused. The weight of his words hung in the air. We don't hate America. We just wonder why your love never reached us. And that's when it happened. Obama's eyes glassed over. He reached for a handkerchief and wiped the corner of his eye. He wasn't crying for himself. He was crying for a truth he had long ignored. Outside, across continents, millions of Africans felt seen for the first time. A single photo? Traoré held it up like fragile glass. The camera zoomed in. It showed a boy lying on a filthy hospital bed, ribs protruding, a fly perched on his cheek, eyes wide open, empty. This child, Traoré said, voice trembling not with fear but fury, is named Isaka. He was 7. He died waiting for medicine that never came. The room froze. Some leaned forward, others looked away, ashamed. Our gold built your skyscrapers. Our cocoa sweetened your chocolate. Our uranium powered your homes. But our children, they were left to rot. Obama's eyes stayed locked on the image. Traoré turned to him. Me, Mr. President, did you ever ask why Africa never healed after colonialism? Or were our screams too distant to hear from the White House? Obama's mouth opened slightly, then closed. A woman in the audience wept silently. Outside, social media erupted. Africa speaks. Isaka deserved better. But Traoré wasn't finished. He carefully folded the photo, placed it in his jacket, and said, I didn't come here to shame you. I came to remind you of what the world chose to forget. Obama sat motionless. But something had shifted in his eyes. Not politics, not pride, pain, deep old pain, buried beneath speeches, policies, handshakes. Now awakened, he reached for his glass of water. His hand trembled. Traoré stepped down from the podium, walking slowly to the center of the room. His boots echoed. He turned to the global panel. The world says Africa needs saving. What we need is listening, respect, accountability. His voice dropped to a whisper. I've walked through burned villages. I've heard mothers scream into empty skies. And still the West sends lectures, not help. Obama's breathing grew heavier. Traoré's tone softened. I'm not your enemy, he said gently. But you are our hope. And we need you to know. We remember everything. Then suddenly, Obama stood. The moderator panicked. Mr. Obama? But Obama didn't leave. He stepped forward slowly. His voice cracked. I need to say something. A chill swept through the room. Even Traoré looked surprised. The former president faced him, eyes glassy. You're right, Obama whispered. You're absolutely right. The silence roared louder than any applause. He gripped the microphone. His hand still shook. I failed you, he said. No spin, no politics, just pain. I visited Africa 4 times during my presidency. I gave speeches, smiled for cameras, but in truth, I avoided the hard part. I didn't want to face the damage or our role in keeping Africa beneath the surface. His voice cracked again. My father was Kenyan, but I never truly went back to understand his pain. I wore the suit. I played the game. I forgot the cries from across the ocean. A single tear slipped down his cheek. I'm sorry, he whispered. Even Traoré's face softened, just slightly. The crowd didn't clap. They couldn't. Something deeper was happening. For the first time in history, the most powerful black leader of the West stood before an African revolutionary and apologized. Would you like me to also give you a more cinematic screenplay version, or a slightly more emotional version for maximum impact? This is very strong material. We can make it even sharper depending on your goal. Here's your full scene rewritten, polished for emotional impact, clarity, and cinematic power. Outside, videos of the moment were flooding TikTok, Instagram, YouTube. Teens across Africa shared the clip with captions like, "Finally, our pain is being heard." Inside the hall, Obama looked at Traoré and said softly, I can't undo the past, but I want to help repair what I ignored. The silence broke when Traoré asked just one question. How? Obama swallowed hard. The entire world was still watching. From the center of the grand studio, filled with presidents, diplomats, and cameras, Captain Ibrahim Traoré leaned forward and repeated, his voice steady, honest, how it wasn't angry. It wasn't sarcastic. It was heavy. Real. Obama froze. Everyone did. How? Traoré repeated. Do you plan to help repair a wound you refused to see for years? The cameras caught beads of sweat on Obama's brow. His silence wasn't just awkward, it was devastating. For all his speeches, all his legacies, he had no answer. Finally, he whispered, I don't know. The room dropped into a painful stillness. Traoré didn't mock him. He didn't smile. He simply nodded. Then let me show you. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a worn, folded piece of paper. This, he said, is a letter from a mother in Gibo. She wrote it to the United Nations. It was never answered. Obama reached out to take it, but Traoré didn't let go. Not until you promise to actually read it. The world leaned in. Obama slowly unfolded the paper, as if it might fall apart in his hands. The ink was smudged from tears. Written in shaky French. Traoré translated aloud so the world could hear. To those in power, I do not write to beg. I write because my son died with his eyes open, and I cannot close them. He was 12. His name was Hamadou. He didn't die from bullets. He died waiting for food that was stolen. He died watching trucks pass our village with aid that never stopped for us. They say Africa must rise. But how do we rise when our hands are tied by loans, our leaders trained by fear, and our children buried under silence? If you see my son's face, remember, he had dreams. He wanted to become a teacher. He never hurt anyone. Why was he invisible to the world? The room froze. A quiet sob broke from somewhere in the back. Traoré stopped reading. The silence wasn't just emotional. It was sacred. Obama's voice was barely a whisper. Where is she now? Didn't blink. She died last month. A pause from hunger. Obama bowed his head. He sat back in his chair, the letter clutched in his hand like it weighed 100 pounds. He couldn't speak. Not yet. The moderator glanced nervously at the production crew. Even they had tears in their eyes. The moment had spiraled far beyond politics. Traoré returned to the podium and stood silent for 5 full seconds before speaking. I didn't come here to win applause. I came because silence has killed more Africans than war. Obama finally looked up. Everything you've said, it's the truth, he admitted, and it's a truth I never faced when I had power. Traoré nodded. But you have power now. The power to listen. The power to speak honestly to those who clapped while Africa bled. And then, for the first time, Traoré's voice cracked. I carry the weight of my people every time I speak, every time I stand. Do you know what that feels like? Obama nodded slowly. I do now. A journalist whispered to her colleague. This isn't a summit. This is a reckoning. Outside, crowds had gathered, young Africans watching on their phones, cheering, crying. The world was shifting, and it wasn't over yet. Traoré reached beneath the podium and unfolded something unexpected, a massive map of Africa, but not the one seen in classrooms. This one was scarred. Red circles marked where children had died waiting for food. Black X's marked abandoned hospitals. Tiny flames pointed to gold mines run by foreign companies. This, Traoré said, is not a history lesson. It's a body count. He stared at the map. Each mark is a story the world ignored. Each dot was a cry for help. But help didn't come. Aid came with strings. Loans came with chains. Partnerships came with guns. Obama looked down at the map and whispered, my God. Traoré stepped closer. You see influence? We see graves. You see business. We see betrayal. Someone in the crowd broke into tears. You say Africa is unstable, Traoré continued, but you destabilized it. The weight of his words made leaders shift uncomfortably in their seats, and just when it felt too heavy to bear, Traoré turned to him. Mr. President, do you want to help? He paused, then stopped looking at us from up high. Come down here, feel what we feel. Obama stood, the entire room held its breath. He stepped toward the map, walked slowly, eyes locked on the scarred continent. Then he did the unthinkable, knelt beside it, no script, no permission, no politics, just truth. Gasps echoed across the hall, cameras flashed. Even Traoré looked stunned. Obama placed his hand gently on a red circle. Where was this? He asked. Traoré answered softly. Tawi, northern Burkina Faso. A school was bombed by mistake. 7 children died. Obama closed his eyes. This isn't just about Africa, he said. This is about the world, finally. Learning how to listen, he looked up at Traoré. You've done what no one else dared. You showed the pain, not the policy. The moderator tried to intervene, but the audience hushed him. Traoré didn't gloat. He didn't smile. He simply said, the world only sees Africa when we're on fire, but we are more than tragedy. We are resilient. If you'd like, I can give you a cinematic screenplay version, or a powerfully condensed version suitable for a final monologue showdown. Shall I prepare one? Here's your full scene, rewritten and polished, keeping all the power, emotion, and cinematic intensity. Obama stood again. I want to walk with you, he said, if you'll allow me. The tension shifted. Something was happening. Something honest, human. A Western leader was no longer standing above Africa. He was finally standing beside it, and the world saw it happen, just as emotions reached their peak. Traoré raised his hand. I need you all to hear something, he said quietly. He pulled a small recorder from his pocket. The room leaned in. No one knew what was coming. He pressed play. A woman's voice filled the hall, rasping, tired, full of heartbreak. She spoke the language of Central Faso as her voice trembled. Traoré translated in real time. To the powerful I speak for those who can't. My son was taken by men with foreign guns. They called it peacekeeping. He never came back. A chill swept through the room. We don't want pity. We want to live, to dream, to not fear helicopters in the sky. Her voice faded. Traoré put the recorder down gently. She passed away 1 week after sending that recording. No hospital, no medicine, just silence. Obama looked down. The room held its breath. The weight was unbearable. Traoré stared into the cameras. How many more voices must fade before the world hears us? On social media, millions were now watching live. Thousands commented, I'm crying. This broke me. Africa is speaking. The world must answer. And yet, as applause faded into quiet, Traoré walked to the side of the stage and placed a small, empty wooden chair next to the speaker's row. He didn't explain at first. He simply stood beside it. Then, his voice steady but trembling, he spoke. This chair belongs to the African child who never got the chance to speak here today. The room went completely still. This chair is for Aminata in Mali, who died giving birth on a clinic floor because foreign companies drained our doctors away with better offers overseas. He placed a folded cloth over the seat. For Musa in Niger, who dropped out of school to mine gold that was shipped to Europe, while his village remained in darkness. Obama wiped his eyes again, and it's for the millions of African voices who were always present but never invited. Traoré looked directly at the audience. We are not asking for pity. We are demanding memory. One by one, people stood, someone whispered, barely audible. We should never leave this chair empty again. Across Africa, young people screenshotted the image and shared it with a single caption. This is us. And just as silence settled again, something unexpected happened. A Western diplomat, Ambassador Louise Carter of Canada, slowly stood from her seat. She cleared her throat. Her voice shook. Captain Traoré, she began softly. I, came here today thinking I would listen to policy, but I ended up listening to pain. Traoré nodded, watching her closely. For years, Carter continued, we sat at these tables, nodding, writing reports, approving budgets, but never hearing stories like Amin. She paused, looking around the room. And that makes us guilty. Not by action, but by indifference. People whispered. Some lowered their heads. The moment was breaking down walls. I can't undo what's been done, she added. But I will return to Ottawa, and I will fight. For a new kind of aid, a partnership, not a leash. The hall fell into silence again, not of avoidance, but of reckoning, if you want. I can now help you prepare a full cinematic version, film script style. A climax speech version for maximum emotional buildup, or a tight novel version. With maximum literary weight, just tell me which one you want. Here's your full scene rewritten and polished for maximum emotional weight, cinematic flow, and clarity. Applause began. Soft at first, then louder, then unstoppable. Traoré didn't smile, but his eyes softened. Thank you, he said quietly. The healing begins when truth is no longer buried beneath diplomacy. From the crowd, a journalist from Ghana stood and called out, what happens after this moment? Traoré turned slowly, voice calm but heavy. That depends, he answered, on who chooses to remember and who chooses to act. The world was no longer watching, it was listening. Barack Obama took a deep breath and returned to the stage. His voice was low, steady. I once said, we are the change we've been waiting for, but truthfully, I was never brave enough to say what you just did. He turned to face Traoré. He spoke with the fire of a soldier, but with the soul of a father. Traoré's jaw tightened. He stood still, silent. Obama continued. You've reminded me of something I forgot, the cost of silence. And I don't want to be remembered for what I built. I want to be remembered for what I changed. Then, with millions watching live, he looked directly into the camera. To every African child who ever thought the world forgot them, I see you now, and I'm sorry. Gasps, crying. A standing ovation erupted, but Traoré didn't move. Instead, he slowly raised one finger and pointed toward the empty wooden chair. Obama understood. Some wounds don't close with one speech, and some memories must never fade. Outside, students gathered in the streets, holding candles. Across Nigeria, Ghana, Burkina Faso, people remained glued to their screens. They weren't just watching history, they were becoming part of it. Inside the hall, silence returned. Obama stepped away. He sat at the long table where dignitaries once boasted of progress, and quietly, without asking, pulled a notepad from his folder. Everyone watched. The cameras zoomed in, his trembling hand gripping the pen, his brow furrowed, eyes glistening. For 2 full minutes, he wrote. Then, without fanfare, he stood, walked back to the stage, and handed the single page to Captain Traoré. If you want, I can also now combine the entire sequence you've built into one complete, unified cinematic scene, ready for script, film, or novel format. Here's your full scene rewritten, polished for maximum emotional power, cinematic flow, and resonance. I wrote this, Obama said, not as a politician, but as a father. Traoré took the paper, reading it silently at first. Then, his voice steady, he read aloud. To the child, I failed. I do not know your name, but I know your pain. I now see what I didn't. I can never make it right, but I will make sure the world never forgets you again. Traoré closed the letter gently. Obama's hands were shaken. Traoré looked at him, and for the first time, nodded. A single gesture, not forgiveness, but truth, finally shared. The forum was nearly over, but no one moved. Captain Traoré turned to the global audience, now in the hundreds of millions. His voice softened. I want to end this moment, he said, with a promise to the mothers still waiting. He raised a photograph. 5 women sitting outside a small health center in Kaya, Burkina Faso, eyes tired, faces weathered by years of waiting. They don't want speeches. They don't want pity. They want their sons back, their daughters alive, their dignity restored. A soft gasp swept through the crowd. Then Traoré declared, from this day Burkina Faso will no longer beg for help. We will build our future, with hands blistered by truth, but we will welcome any who come with open hands, not closed fists. Obama stood silently beside him. He didn't interrupt. He simply bowed his head, one by one. The world's leaders followed, even those who had once looked down on Africa. And somewhere, in the dusty corner of a rural school, a child watched on a cracked phone screen and whispered, "We matter." Now, the forum officially ended, but no one left. Instead, a soft rhythm began. Slow claps from the African youth in the gallery, then tears, then chants, Traoré, Traoré. But Traoré didn't raise his fist. Instead, he walked toward the small wooden chair, the chair he had placed on stage, symbol of Africa's unheard. Gently, with both hands, he lifted it, and walked down the aisle in silence. Obama followed behind him, no longer the center, just a witness to a moment history would never forget. The cameras followed them through the doors into the Geneva sunlight. Outside, thousands of people fell. Silent, they made way. The empty chair passed between them, and for the first time, in a long, long time, Africa led and the world followed. And somewhere, on millions of screens, a new kind of message appeared. If this story touched you, if your heart broke for the unheard, if your eyes welled with tears for every child Africa lost in silence, don't scroll past. Like this video, not for me, but for the mothers who still wait. Comment below, I hear Africa now, and subscribe because this channel tells the stories the world tries to forget. Help us make sure that chair is never empty again. Would you like me now to combine all the rewritten scenes into one continuous cinematic sequence? It's ready to become a full film climax or novel finale. Shall I assemble it?